Blood was on his hands, and Winston couldn't remember how it got there. The dim corridor around him pulsed with distant alarms, a steady heartbeat of danger echoing through the underground facility. Smoke drifted past his face in ragged currents, carrying with it the metallic smell of something ruined, machinery, perhaps, or something far more human. He pressed his back to the cold wall, breathing hard, listening for footsteps he prayed would not come. Every instinct told him he had only moments before the unseen threat behind all this chaos closed in again. He tried to retrace what had happened only minutes earlier, but his memory was a cracked mirror, sharp edges, missing pieces, fragments that refused to align. He remembered voices raised in panic. He remembered the lights flickering, plunging everything into a blackness so thick it felt physical. He remembered reaching out for someone important, but grasping only air. And then the sound, a roar that didn't seem like it belonged to a machine or a man. After that, only flashes. The stain on his hands. The trembling in his legs. The knowledge that something had gone terribly wrong. Shadows flickered across the corridor floor as another distant explosion rattled the building. Dust drifted down around him. He forced himself to move. His legs protested, but he pushed forward, slipping between fallen beams and collapsed wiring that sparked like dying fireflies. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became, as though the darkness itself thickened with every step. Yet he kept going, not because he knew where he was headed, but because stopping felt like an invitation to whatever hunted these halls. Somewhere behind him, metal scraped against metal, slow, deliberate, dragging. He froze, pulse hammering. The sound stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that made his skin crawl. He didn't dare turn around. The moment he looked, the moment he acknowledged the thing that shared the darkness with him, he knew he wouldn't be able to keep moving. Instead he continued forward, forcing his feet into motion like a man walking through a dream he couldn't control. The corridor shifted into a stairwell, narrow and winding, lit only by the flicker of emergency bulbs. He gripped the railing to steady himself, the iron cold enough to burn. Halfway down the steps he heard voices, muffled, frantic. He leaned over the railing, trying to catch the words, but they dissolved into echoes before reaching him. He couldn't tell if they belonged to allies or something far worse. Still, human voices meant hope, however fragile. He descended quickly, almost stumbling when the stairs shuddered beneath him. At the bottom he found a door, its hinges warped but intact. A faint light leaked through the cracks. He pushed, and the door groaned open to reveal a room that looked strangely untouched by the chaos outside, papers stacked neatly, a lantern burning steadily on a steel table, the air still and eerily calm. The sudden quiet pressed in on him like a weight. His instincts screamed at him that the calm was wrong, an illusion meant to lure him into dropping his guard. He stepped inside anyway. The lantern's glow softened the panic clawing at his throat, if only slightly. On the table lay a map marked with red ink and cryptic symbols, symbols he recognized yet could not remember learning. His fingertips hovered over them, his mind pulling at threads he couldn't quite untangle. Something about the map mattered. Something vital. Its meaning tugged at the edges of his fractured memory, calling him toward a truth he could almost touch. But before he could focus, a sudden thud struck the door behind him. Not the uncertain scrape from earlier, this was solid, forceful, intentional. He spun toward the noise, heart slamming against his ribs. The lantern's flame danced wildly, shadows jerking across the walls like living things. He scanned the room for a weapon, anything he could use, but found only a heavy metal pen and a chair too flimsy to be worth swinging. Another thud. The hinges trembled. He backed away slowly, trying to stay silent even though every breath felt painfully loud. He reached the far wall just as the door trembled again, warping inward with a deep groan. Something, or someone, was on the other side, testing the barrier with a patience that felt far more unnerving than rage. The pause between impacts made his nerves twist tighter. Whatever pressed against the door was deliberate. Intentional. Intelligent. The lantern flickered once more and went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Winston held his breath. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't dare. The silence stretched until his chest burned. He couldn't tell whether the door still held or whether the thing beyond it now stood inside the room with him. He felt the dark pressing close, thick, suffocating. His ears strained for the slightest hint of movement. A whisper brushed the edge of his hearing. Not words, just breath. Too close. His lungs tightened. He reached into his pocket without thinking, fingers closing around the one object he hadn't lost, a small, battered notebook. He didn't know why he carried it or what it meant, but touching it grounded him, steadied him, reminded him of something essential, something the fog in his mind had not yet taken. The whisper came again, this time from the opposite side of the room. He took a single step forward, slow, careful, refusing to succumb to the terror rising in his throat. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what hunted him. He didn't even know what had started all of this. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity, a truth sharp enough to cut through the confusion. He wasn't alone in the dark. And whatever shared it with him was waiting. He woke to the sound of someone screaming his name, only to realize it was his own voice. The echo ricocheted through the cavernous darkness around him, swallowed almost instantly by the air, as though the space itself refused to carry sound for long. Winston clamped a hand over his mouth, chest heaving, sweat cold against his skin. He didn't remember falling asleep, and the fact that he had, here, of all places, terrified him more than the nightmare that must have dragged the scream out of him. His fingers searched blindly around the floor. The notebook was gone. That realization hit him harder than the scream had. He scrambled forward, palms sweeping frantically across the cold ground, finding only dust and grit. The notebook had been the one thing tethering him to whatever truth lay behind the fractured edges of his memory. Losing it felt like losing a lifeline he hadn't fully understood yet. He took a shaky breath and forced himself to be still. Panic would get him killed. The air around him had changed since the last thing he remembered. The silence was deeper, heavier, as though the darkness itself was thick enough to wade through. He could smell something new, too, not smoke, not metal, something organic. The scent reminded him of soil turned over by a spade, the kind found in graves freshly dug. A faint rustling drifted from somewhere in front of him. Winston froze, muscles locking, every nerve tuned to the sound. It wasn't footsteps. Footsteps had weight. This was softer, like fabric dragging lightly against stone or perhaps something crawling slowly across the ground, too close for comfort. His hand brushed something smooth and cold. Instinctively he flinched, only to realize it was the lantern from before. Its flame was still extinguished, but it gave him a direction, an anchor. He kept one hand on it and forced himself to stand, even though his legs trembled beneath him. When he rose, his head struck something low and metallic. The clang reverberated through the chamber, sending a shock of pain through his skull. He gritted his teeth, steadying himself against what turned out to be a pipe running across the ceiling. That meant he was no longer in the same room. He had been moved, to another part of the facility. The rustling stopped the moment the pipe rang out. Winston felt the shift, the way the darkness around him listened. Whatever he wasn't seeing was reacting to him. He whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" No answer. Just the faint hum of machinery somewhere far below, like the steady pulse of a massive creature sleeping. He took a cautious step forward, dragging the lantern with him. He needed a wall, a door, anything that could give him bearings. His foot caught on something soft. He stumbled, caught himself, and crouched to feel what it was. His fingers brushed fabric, then something warm beneath it. He jerked his hand back. A body. Someone else was here, or had been. He didn't dare check for breath. Before he could move away, the darkness shifted again. This time the sound was unmistakable, a slow inhale, like lungs filling with air after a long sleep. But it wasn't coming from the figure on the ground. It came from somewhere above him. Winston staggered backward, his shoulder slamming into a wall he hadn't realized was behind him. Relief surged through him. He had found an edge, a boundary, something solid. But even as he pressed against it, he felt a faint vibration under the surface, a rhythmic tremor that matched the machinery-like hum from below. He forced himself to breathe slowly, quietly. The inhale overhead continued, dragging out too long, too steadily to be human. He imagined something clinging to the ceiling, watching him, waiting for him to make another noise. The lantern jolted in his hand as the floor trembled. A distant boom reverberated through the structure, and the ceiling above him groaned. Dust drifted down, sprinkling his hair and shoulders. The inhale paused. Then the rustling returned, this time behind him. He spun, pressing his back firmly to the wall. The darkness in front of him felt alive, shifting with intent. Winston's heartbeat thundered in his ears, loud enough that he feared it would give him away. He reached into his coat pocket, empty. The notebook was not the only thing missing. Something else had been taken. Something he felt he should remember but couldn't pull from the fog clouding his mind. The rustling grew closer, inch by inch, with the deliberate patience of a predator amused by prey that thought it could hide. Winston's hand grazed along the wall, searching for anything, a switch, a panel, a handle. He found a seam in the metal. A door. Relief surged, but he stifled it quickly. He didn't know what lay behind it. He didn't know if opening it would save him or doom him. The rustling stopped again. The silence that followed was suffocating. He felt pressure against the wall at his side, a slow, steady push from the other side of the metal. Something was leaning into the steel, testing its strength. Winston didn't think. He acted. He shoved his fingers into the seam and pulled. The door groaned, metal scraping against metal, opening just enough for him to slip through. He squeezed into the new space, dragging the lantern after him and pulling the door shut behind him with a sharp metallic clang. He stood there, breath ragged, forehead pressed to the cold steel. For a moment, nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing reached for him. Then something slammed into the other side of the door with a force that made the entire frame shudder. Winston stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The impact came again, harder this time. The hinges squealed, bending visibly in the darkness. He backed away, step by step, knowing there was nowhere safe to run, not yet. The pounding grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was out there wanted him. Needed him. And as the door began to buckle inward, Winston realized something far more terrifying. It knew exactly who he was, even if he didn't. His first thought was that he was dying, his second was that someone else was making sure of it. Winston's body convulsed as he hit the ground, the air punched clean out of his lungs. He didn't know how long he'd been falling, seconds, minutes, an eternity, but the impact was sudden enough to snap every nerve in his body awake. For a moment he lay there, gasping, fighting the spinning in his vision. The floor beneath him vibrated with a low mechanical rumble, like some buried engine stirring to life. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself upright. His hands burned, scraped raw. The lantern was gone, shattered somewhere above or lost in the dark, and the absence of its faint glow made the void around him feel infinite. He blinked against the darkness, trying to orient himself. He had been in a room. A door had been breaking. Something had been coming for him. Then, his mind replayed it. He'd found another hatch, yanked it open in blind panic, and stepped into nothing. A deliberate nothing. A drop. A trap? He wasn't sure whether he had escaped something worse or fallen exactly where it wanted him. The darkness around him thrummed again, softer this time, as though responding to him. He steadied himself, pressing one hand against the cold floor. Metal, smooth, but worn, almost polished by time or movement. His other hand reached into the empty space ahead and found a wall, also metal, curved slightly. He realized then that he wasn't in an open chamber. He was in a shaft, or a tunnel, cylindrical, narrow, barely wide enough for him to move without scraping skin. He tried standing fully, and his head brushed the ceiling. Claustrophobia tightened around his ribs. A soft clicking noise drifted from somewhere below. Not a mechanical click, organic, like joints bending, like tiny bones shifting. Winston froze, breath caught in his throat. The sound came again, closer this time. He forced himself to stay silent, though every instinct screamed at him to climb, to run, to get away. But climbing meant reaching the hatch he'd fallen through, and he wasn't sure it was even accessible anymore, if it hadn't already closed. Or if something wasn't waiting directly above it. The clicking moved again, this time to his left. Except there was no left in this tube, just more darkness. Which meant something was in here with him. Winston pressed his back to the curved wall, spreading his palms out, trying to judge where the noises came from. The metal was colder here, almost damp. His fingers brushed a pattern etched into it, a line, then a circle, then another line. Symbols. Not random scratches. Carvings. The same kind he'd seen on the map. The realization chilled him more than the air. Someone had been here long before he fell into this place. Someone had written something he couldn't read yet instinctively understood was not meant for safety. A sudden vibration rippled through the floor. Not the steady hum from before, this was a pulse, rhythmic, almost like footsteps approaching from somewhere below. Heavy footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Winston swallowed hard. He couldn't stay where he was. He couldn't climb back. The only direction was forward, or downward. He chose forward, inching along the tunnel with his hands on the metal to guide him. Every movement was agony, his muscles protested, his injuries burned, and his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape on its own. The tunnel curved sharply. As he rounded the bend, faint light appeared ahead, blue, cold, flickering. Relief hit him so sharply he almost cried out. After so long in total darkness, any light felt like salvation. He moved faster, careful but desperate, drawn to the glow like a drowning man toward the surface. He reached an opening. A grate of twisted metal hung loosely, as if ripped apart from the inside. Beyond it was a larger chamber illuminated by the pulsing blue light. Winston crouched at the edge, studying the room below. He saw shadows first, too many to count, moving along the walls in unnatural patterns. The light made them stretch, distort, curl into shapes that didn't match anything he knew. Then he saw the machinery. Huge, ancient, humming with intermittent bursts of energy. Cables snaked across the floor like vines, some severed, some pulsing with life. At the center of it all stood a platform with something resting on it. A box? A container? A coffin? He couldn't tell from this angle. But what froze him in place was the figure standing beside it. Human-shaped. Motionless. Watching the platform with its back to him. Winston's breath hitched. He didn't move as he stared, waiting, praying the figure wouldn't turn. He felt a pressure in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. The hum of the machinery rose in pitch, the blue light flashing brighter. Then something touched his ankle. He jerked, slamming his elbow against the tunnel wall. Pain shot up his arm, but before he could react to that, cold fingers wrapped around his leg with shocking strength. He kicked, twisting desperately, but the grip tightened, pulling him back into the tunnel. A whisper unfurled from the darkness behind him, too close, too soft, too human to be human. I found you. Winston clawed at the grate, trying to anchor himself. The metal bent in his grasp, slicing into his palms. He didn't care. He braced his feet, pulled with everything he had left, and felt the fingers slipping, not loosening, but peeling away as though they were melting into the darkness again. He tore free, stumbled forward, and fell through the broken grate into the chamber below, hitting the ground hard enough to see stars. The hum of the machinery drowned out his gasps. When he looked up, the human-shaped figure at the platform was no longer facing the center. It was facing him. And its eyes glowed with the same cold blue light pulsing through the room. He didn't realize he was screaming until the figure told him to stop. Its voice did not echo. It didn't need to. The words slid through the air like something alive, landing directly in his mind with a cold, unnerving clarity. Winston clamped his jaw shut instantly, not because he obeyed, but because the sound of his own scream suddenly felt dangerous, as though noise itself might summon something worse from the shadows around them. He scrambled backward on his elbows, boots scraping across the metal floor as the figure stepped toward him. It moved slowly, deliberately, each step accompanied by the faint thrum of the machinery pulsing in time with those dead blue eyes. The light seemed to ripple through its body, as if illuminating a hollow shell rather than flesh and bone. Winston pushed himself upright, stumbling as he tried to put distance between himself and the thing. The chamber vibrated again. A low, shuddering exhale seemed to drift from the walls themselves. The cables on the ground twitched like roots disturbed by something rising beneath them. Winston forced his gaze away from the figure just long enough to scan the room for an exit. There were doors, several, but most were sealed behind heavy locking bars or blocked by debris. The only path that seemed remotely passable lay behind the platform, but reaching it meant getting closer to the creature watching him. "Don't," the figure said, as if reading the shift in his posture. "You won't make it." Winston froze. He hated how easily fear locked his limbs, how quickly he'd become prey without fully understanding why. But the creature didn't advance further. Instead it tilted its head, studying him. Its movements were too smooth, too calculated. Not human curiosity, assessment. "What do you want?" Winston forced out, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The figure didn't answer at first. Then its eyes flickered, and the machinery pulsed brighter, as if responding to the question. "What I want doesn't matter yet." Yet. A chill crawled down Winston's spine. He edged to the side, testing how closely the creature tracked his motion. Its gaze followed, but it didn't move. The cables beneath its feet recoiled slightly, retreating into the floor as if afraid to touch it. That detail lodged itself like a thorn in his mind. Whatever this thing was, the room itself reacted to it. Winston's foot brushed something small. He glanced down and saw a shard of metal, jagged, no bigger than his hand. A piece of the grate he'd crashed through. A potential weapon, not much of one, but better than nothing. He kept his movement slow, careful, crouching as if recoiling in fear while letting his fingers close around the shard. "You think that will help you?" the figure asked. Not mocking, merely observing. Winston stood again, holding the shard low at his side. "Maybe." The figure's head tilted once more. "You still don't understand where you are." He didn't. Not fully. Not even close. But he wasn't going to admit it. Before he could answer, the chamber lights flickered violently. The machinery emitted a strained, pained whine. The platform behind the figure trembled. Something inside the container, or coffin, or whatever it was, shifted. A thud, deep and resonant, rolled out across the floor like a heartbeat. The blue light surged. Winston backed toward the chamber wall. "What was that?" "It woke up," the figure said simply. "Earlier than expected." The container shuddered again, metal warping under the force of something pushing from the inside. Winston's grip on the shard tightened until his knuckles whitened. Instinct told him he did not want to see what was inside that thing. Instinct told him to run. The figure took a single step toward him and raised its hand, not threatening, but commanding. "You need to listen to me," it said. "You cannot let it out." Winston barked out a harsh, bitter laugh he didn't feel. "I'm not the one opening it." "You are," the figure said. "You always were." Before he could ask what that meant, the container emitted a cracking sound, metal splitting. A thin beam of harsh white light shot through the widening gap. The cables on the floor writhed wildly, as though trying to retreat from whatever was emerging. The machinery's hum rose to a feverish pitch. The figure turned toward the platform. It's too soon. It isn't ready. You aren't ready. The gap widened. A sound seeped out, soft, irregular, like breath being dragged through shattered lungs. Not alive. Not dead. Something in between. Winston felt the terror hit him physically, as if the air itself had turned solid and pressed down on him. He moved sideways toward the far corner of the chamber, eyes locked on the container. The figure reached for the platform controls, pressing its glowing hand against a panel built into the machine. The lights flickered, then dimmed. The machinery sputtered, straining. "Stay back," it ordered Winston. "If you get closer, it will recognize you." Winston's mind spun. "Recognize me? For what?" The figure didn't answer. Instead it pressed harder against the panel, and the chamber filled with the sound of grinding metal as the machinery attempted to seal the container shut again. Sparks flew. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. But the thing inside pushed back harder. The container buckled outward. The white light intensified. A thin, skeletal hand punched through the crack, fingers too long, joints bending in ways that hurt to look at. The hand clawed at the air, groping, searching. Searching for him. Winston stumbled backward, stomach lurching. He pressed himself against the cold wall, wishing desperately he could disappear into it. The figure slammed its fist into the panel again. "Winston, do not move." The skeletal hand reached further, pulling the crack wider. The container began to split from top to bottom. Light poured out like liquid. Winston squeezed his eyes shut. The fear was overwhelming, choking, impossible to push back. But the moment he closed his eyes, he saw something, flashes. Not memory. Not dream. Something worse. A field of bodies. A tower of machines. A door buried deep beneath the earth. His own hand reaching for a switch he didn't remember touching. He opened his eyes with a gasp, collapsing to his knees. The figure's voice broke through the chaos. "Listen to me. You have to choose." Winston stared up at it, shaking. "Choose what?" "The same choice you made before," it said. "The one that destroyed everything." Another thud from the container. The skeletal hand curled around the edge, flexing. The creature inside was moments from breaking free. "Tell me what I did." Winston shouted. The figure's eyes flickered. "You opened the door." The container split apart with a scream of metal, the white light flooding the chamber. And something stepped out. It stepped into the chamber with the sound of something heavy, remembering it had once been human. Winston's mind recoiled the moment he saw it, not because he understood what it was, but because some buried part of him recognized it instantly, instinctively, with a terror so old it felt inherited. The thing stood hunched, its limbs wrong, its movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The harsh white light pouring from its body flickered like a dying star, throwing jagged shadows across the metal floor. He pressed back against the wall, chest tightening. Every nerve screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to obey. The creature lifted its head, and for the first time Winston saw the hollow where a face should have been. Not blank. Not featureless. Hollow, as if something had eaten the face from the inside out. The figure beside the ruined container didn't move. Its blue eyes dimmed slightly, as though bracing itself. "Stay still," it warned quietly, but its voice shook now. "If it fully sees you." The creature turned toward Winston. The figure reacted instantly, stepping between them. "No. Look at me." The creature paused, head tilting, white light pulsing irregularly within its chest. Winston had the sudden, horrifying impression that it wasn't thinking, it was remembering. And that memory had something to do with him. He clutched the metal shard tighter. The edge dug into his palm, grounding him, anchoring him. He couldn't think clearly through the adrenaline, but he knew one thing with certainty: whatever climbed out of that container wasn't supposed to exist outside it. The figure raised both hands toward the creature. "You are not ready. Return." The creature took another step. The floor beneath it vibrated with each movement, as if recoiling from contact. "Return," the figure repeated, brighter this time, voice resonating with the machinery. "You were sealed for a reason." Something cracked. Not metal, something inside the creature. A sharp, brittle sound, like bone fracturing. The creature shuddered violently, its limbs twitching. The white light flared. The figure braced itself. Winston knew something terrible was about to happen. He wasn't sure how he knew, only that certainty slammed into him with the force of memory. He forced himself to stand, gripping the shard with both hands. The chamber lights flickered wildly. Sparks shot across the machinery. The cables writhed as if trying to disconnect themselves from the systems they fed. The creature leaned forward, arching its back unnaturally, and emitted a sound that made Winston's blood run cold. Not a scream. Not a roar. A question. "What door?" The figure stiffened. The creature lifted a twisted arm, pointing directly at Winston. "What door?" Winston's throat tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." You do, the figure whispered to him without turning. You always did. The creature surged forward with sudden, blinding speed. The figure threw itself into its path. The impact sent both crashing into a row of machinery that burst into sparks. Winston flinched as the explosion of light momentarily blinded him. Run, the figure shouted. But Winston didn't move. He couldn't, not yet. He watched as the creature pinned the figure to the ground. The white light poured from its body like smoke, seeping into the metal, into the machinery, into the floor. The chamber shook violently, dust falling from above like ash. The figure struggled beneath it, its blue glow flickering erratically. Winston, go! This time, Winston forced his body into motion. He sprinted toward the back of the chamber, toward the only passable exit he'd seen earlier. The tunnel beyond it sloped upward, promising distance, however fragile, between him and whatever monstrous truth he was entangled with. But as he ran, the creature's voice echoed behind him, warped and broken. Door, opened, because of him. Winston stumbled, catching himself on the tunnel wall. What door? What did I do? The creature thrashed, and the chamber trembled again. The figure's voice answered, strained and weakening. You let it through. Through what? The figure didn't respond. The creature answered instead. Through us. The tunnel behind Winston lit up with a sudden white flash. He turned just as the creature tore itself free from the figure's grip. The figure collapsed, its blue glow fading to a faint ember. The creature rose slowly, limbs trembling with renewed strength. Winston backed deeper into the tunnel. Don't follow me. But it did. Every step it took echoed through the corridor like a verdict. Winston ran, stumbling, breath tearing through his lungs. The tunnel ahead twisted sharply, opening into another chamber, this one smaller, but with higher ceilings and walls lined with panels he couldn't interpret. Red lights flashed erratically, bathing everything in a chaotic glow. Behind him, the creature entered the tunnel. Its white light dimmed in the red glow, giving it an almost human silhouette, almost. Winston pressed himself against the far wall. He searched wildly for something, anything, that could help. His eyes caught a lever on the panel to his right, covered in dust and warning symbols. He didn't know what it controlled. He didn't know if pulling it would seal the door, electrocute him, or trigger something far worse. But he knew the creature was getting closer. He grabbed the lever. His fingers hesitated only once. Then he pulled. The chamber roared to life. The floor vibrated. The walls shifted. A blast shield began to drop between him and the creature, descending slowly, agonizingly slowly. The creature lunged. Winston threw himself to the side as its hand scraped across the floor where he'd stood seconds earlier. The shield continued to fall, inch by inch. The creature slammed into it, forcing its arm beneath the narrowing gap. Its hand clawed toward Winston, fingers grasping, searching for purchase. Stop! Winston shouted. Just tell me what I did. The creature's voice scraped the air like a broken instrument. You opened the door, and we came through. The shield dropped completely, severing the creature's reaching arm with a sickening crunch. The hand twitched once on the floor, its white light fading. Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. Winston collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, shaking uncontrollably. He stared at the severed hand, at the flickering white glow dying within it. He whispered into the empty chamber, voice cracking. What door? Why me? There was no answer. But deep in the facility, behind layers of machinery and ruined corridors, something began to stir. Something bigger than the creature. Something older. Something aware. And for the first time, Winston understood that escaping this place would not save him. The danger hadn't started here. It had started with him. Something inside the wall said his name. Not with a voice, not with breath, just the sound of metal remembering a word it should never have known. Winston froze, every instinct recoiling as the chamber vibrated around him. He pressed a hand to the cold floor to steady himself, but the tremor seemed to pulse beneath his palm like a heartbeat. He wasn't alone. He felt that before he saw anything. The air had changed, thicker, colder, rippling as if something massive moved just beyond the walls. For a moment he thought the creature had returned despite the blast shield, but this presence was different. Wider. Older. Patient in a way only something that never truly died could be. Winston. The tone was low, resonant, as if the entire facility had spoken at once. He staggered to his feet, blood roaring in his ears. Who's there? No answer came. Only the soft groan of metal shifting somewhere far beyond the chamber. His gaze drifted to the severed hand on the floor. The white glow was almost gone, but as he stared, a faint pulse flickered through the fingertips, once, twice, like a dying signal calling for help. He backed away. The blast shield behind him was thick, reinforced, immovable. Whatever the creature had been, it wasn't coming through. But the thing speaking his name, that wasn't behind the shield. It was everywhere. The ceiling lights dimmed one by one, until only a thin strip of red illuminated the chamber. Winston's pulse quickened. He grabbed the metal shard again, though he knew full well it was a meaningless weapon against what hunted him now. Still, he felt less helpless with it in hand, even if the comfort was nothing more than a lie. A low hum filled the air, subtly rising in pitch. He'd heard it earlier, when he'd first entered the facility with no memory of how he arrived. He'd ignored it then. Now it felt like a warning he'd failed to heed. He steadied himself and moved toward the far corridor. The passageway beyond curved in an uneven arc, the walls packed with panels whose lights flickered erratically like panicked eyes. Each step echoed too loudly, as if the facility wanted to announce his presence to whatever listened. Halfway down the corridor, the hum intensified. Winston slowed. The air grew hotter, pressing against his skin like breath. The lights ahead flickered violently, then went out entirely. A shadow moved where no light remained. Winston stumbled back, slamming against the wall. "Who are you?" The darkness shifted. Something vast scraped along the corridor, its outline impossible to define. It wasn't crawling or walking, it was unfolding. Stretching. As though it had been cramped into a space far too small for far too long. "You opened the door," the darkness said, but the voice wasn't the creature's. This one was layered, many voices woven together into a single intent. "You brought us through." Winston's stomach nodded. "I don't remember anything. I don't know what door you're talking about." "You do." The darkness glided closer, filling the corridor without touching a single wall. Winston retreated until his back hit the blast shield. He felt trapped, cornered, the facility closing around him like a mouth. The presence halted a meter away. It waited. Watching without eyes. "What do you want?" he asked. "Completion." Winston swallowed hard. "Completion of what?" Silence stretched, long and trembling. When the answer came, it was whispered as though the facility itself feared the meaning. "Of what you began." He shook his head violently. "No. I didn't begin anything. I don't even remember. Memory is irrelevant. Action is what remains." The presence moved closer still, and Winston felt a vibration in his bones, like an ancient engine revving awake. Images flashed through his mind, too quick to grasp, too fractured to understand. A door made of light. A crowd screaming without sound. His own hand reaching toward something he shouldn't have touched. He gasped, clutching the side of his head. "Stop, stop, I don't understand." "You will." The corridor light surged back on, blinding him. He threw an arm over his face as the brightness seared his eyes. When the light dimmed enough to see, he realized the darkness was gone. But something else had appeared. A panel in the wall had slid open, revealing a narrow stairway leading downward into pitch-black nothingness. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, hidden until now. Winston stared at the stairs, pulse thundering. The air drifting from below was icy, laced with the faint scent of earth, raw, ancient, untouched. He took a step toward the opening despite every instinct screaming for him to run the opposite direction. Somehow, he knew this was where the answers waited, whether he wanted them or not. The moment he reached the top of the stairs, the severed hand behind him twitched violently. He spun around. The fingers shook, curled, then pointed directly at the staircase. Winston whispered a shaky breath. "So that's it." He descended. The stairs spiraled downward for far longer than they should have, as though folding into a space outside the facility's boundaries. The deeper he went, the more the air changed, dense, electric, humming with the same energy he felt when the creature emerged. At the bottom, he stepped into a cavernous chamber illuminated by a single pulsing orb suspended in midair. The orb radiated a pale light, almost gentle, but Winston felt the raw danger pulsing through every wavelength. This was the door. He knew it instantly. The thing he'd opened. The thing he'd released. The fracture between worlds or minds or realities, he couldn't tell which. Behind him, the voice returned, closer now. "Completion." The orb pulsed faster. Winston backed away, shaking his head. "No. I didn't open this. I wouldn't. I couldn't have." But memory stabbed through him, sudden and merciless. He had touched the orb once before. Willingly. Desperately. Someone had begged him not to. A warning he had ignored. A promise he had made. He had opened it. And now it was opening again. The chamber trembled as cracks of light split across the orb's surface, spilling impossible colors into the air. The darkness from the corridor seeped into the room, gathering shape, form, purpose. Winston stood before the door he had once chosen and now wished desperately to undo. "What happens if it completes?" he whispered. The answer slid through the chamber like a blade. "Everything changes." Winston stepped forward, not to flee, but to face it. To end it, if he could. The cracks widened. The light surged. The walls shook. The darkness closed around him like a cloak. He raised the metal shard, Not because it would help, but because he had nothing else left. The ore burst. Light consumed the chamber, swallowing Winston whole, erasing the boundary between what he remembered and what he had forgotten. In the final instant before everything folded into white, he felt something reach for him, recognizing him, claiming him, completing what he had started. And then the world changed.